Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. We have a couple folks joining us online and a couple good many of you here in the sanctuary with us. As I've said in a couple ways, this is kind of starting a conversation about having a conversation. I'm thrilled that Karen Ziel is with us today from the Center for Transformational Leadership from the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ. She's going to tell us a little bit about the work that they do at the CTL and talk a little bit about kind of what a discernment process might look like, about what some churches are going through, what all churches are going through at this point, and about how we might start to begin to have a conversation about what the future of MCC is going to look like over the next decade or so. We're in a pretty good place right now. Things are pretty stable, and it's a good time for us to start thinking about what the future is going to look like, instead of waiting until we're panicked that things are going wrong. So please welcome Karen.
Thanks, folks. What a beautiful space you have, and thank you for your hospitality tonight. It was lovely to meet all of you, or many of you, I should say, and hopefully I'll have a chance to meet all of you at some point this evening. I'm going to begin by just, as Tom said, sharing with you a little bit about the Center for Transformational Leadership. As you know, the Southern New England Conference was formed on January 1st of 2021 of about 609 churches and 1,400 clergy and about 110,000 members. So that's who we are as a covenant community, and of course the conference is here to serve you. So I want to tell you a little bit about how we the Center for Transformational Leadership together and the resources that reside there. And then we're going to explore a little bit about discerning our church's future conversations and what they might include and how you might have those conversations now and in the time to come here in your church. So thanks very much for having me tonight. This is our team. We're currently searching for a program support associate. So we don't know who it is, but we have a pretty good clue. We had our second interview today, and the director and I had a conversation, and we think we know who we're going to extend the invitation to. So shortly we will have a new program associate. Our former program associate, Elisa Wilson, was just wonderfully capable and very helpful, and was also pursuing a career in speech pathology at Southern Connecticut State University. So after about 2 years, she said, my internships are getting really busy and they're sending me all over the place, and this isn't going to work anymore. So we've been in a search, and I'm probably touching buttons I shouldn't touch. I don't know. I'm just thinking my fingers going like this, so what's going on? Anyway, I'm the assistant director. My name is Karen Ziel, and I have the privilege to meet some of you this evening. And our director is Reverend Heather Ramsey Mabrook. I live in Connecticut. Heather lives in Massachusetts. Sometimes we meet in the middle, not too far from here in Framingham. So, and a lot of times we're on Zoom, as you might imagine. Heather has been with the conference was with the Historic Mass Conference in our Together We Thrive clergy development grant program. There are grant initiatives that are ecumenical in that program with the ELCA, the New England Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and also the Western Diocese of the Episcopal Church in Massachusetts. And basically, we collaborate in a couple of initiatives to give clergy leaders the tools and resources they need to develop their capacities and capabilities in ministry in many ways. So we've trained 3 cohorts of coaches. We have offered a program called Tending the Fire, which is about how family systems operate in congregations. And we offer affinity groups and educational intensives. So those are some of them. And so Heather has become the director of the center as well as the director for TWT. We're in the last year of that grant. And so it will be ending for us in December, and some of that good work from the grant program will be coming into the Center for Transformational Leadership. Yeah, so, wrong way? I don't know. Stop. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. We're a little stuck. conference, our executive team, including our executive conference minister, Reverend Darrell Goodwin, had a dream and a vision for a center where all of the resources for lay and clergy development and the resources for church development and church support would come together. And so that's how the center was formed, and it was formed on June 1st of 2021. So we're just coming up to the end of our second year of work, and we're really making the road by walking. And when I say that, what I mean is that we are listening to the needs of our churches and the needs of the folks in our churches for resources and for support and guidance, and trying to figure out what the best way to help folks is. So we do that with some resources and tools I'll introduce you to. Let me try. There we go. See, June 1st, there we go. All right, I did want to tell you how to find our resources on the website. We do have a great website, www.snucc.org. And if you go there, you'll see this is our current landing page. It has 4 different color boxes, and each of these boxes represents a value of the Southern New England Conference. And so the work of the Center for Transformational Leadership comes within that value of bringing new life as agents of change. And so if you click on that box, then you see another purple box at the top left-hand side, and that's the one I'm talking about. And then you'll read here, you'll come to our landing page, and you'll read here basically the purpose statement of the Center for Transformational Leadership, which is, I will read it for you, to equip clergy and lay leaders, congregations, and covenantal partners of the Southern New England Conference with tools and resource and support to create a new vision and to do the transformative ministry that you all are called to do, both in the local church, in your local community, and in the world. We believe that God calls us to bring new life as agents of change, and so we embrace and encourage adaptive and transformative leadership wherever the body of Christ is gathered. We have a newsletter on a monthly basis that we send out, an e-newsletter, which is called Innovation Now, and it always contains some good articles, some practical suggestions. We'll point you to some upcoming programs and opportunities for learning and growth and development within your congregation. And yeah, you can subscribe for free, and then you can unsubscribe anytime you want. I know how email boxes are, but you may find some good things in there. Our key areas of focus for the center are innovation. We love and celebrate small churches, and we celebrate the uniqueness of small churches. And so one of our core values and principles is to support small churches to live their unique call and to thrive. And of course, I mentioned leadership development. An assessment and discernment of your church's future. And that's the basic reason I'm here tonight. We do have a monthly program called Lunch and Learn. It happens from noon to 1 on the 3rd Thursday of the month. And you're all welcome to join us. It is completely virtual. It's online. And those sessions run from September through May. We're just coming up to our last one for this program year. And they're available to anyone at no cost due to your church's proportional giving. And so we're very grateful for the generosity of our churches and the ability to offer programs like this to the folks that we're seeking to serve. I'm just going to read to you the titles of the programs from this year to give you a taste. The invitation is to an hour. So, realistically, what we hope to do is offer congregations sort of a bite-sized taste of something that they might want to know more about or might be valuable and useful to them in the life of their church. So we started in September with priorities for churches in endemic times. And Scott Thumma from the Harvard Institute for Religion Research brought us some really great information. They got a Lilly grant to look at the impact of the pandemic on congregations. And so he brought us some really good insights and some valuable information. October, we talked about and introduced coaching services. So coaches are available to our clergy leaders and also are available to small groups within congregations who are doing developmental work. And those services are fee for service, but they're very reduced from what you might pay, generally speaking, if you were to arrange for them yourself. We've had an introduction to Christian contemplative practices. We've talked about building congregational legacies. We've looked at discerning our church's future. The next one is a big title. I'm going to take my time. But we had Mr. Barry Shelley, who is connected to the Center for the Collective Leadership Institute, which is out of Germany. And they do a lot of work globally with partnerships and collaborations and helping people to understand the important and essential elements of healthy partnerships, good partnerships, mutually supportive partnerships, and collaboration. And so he came and gave us an idea of the ingredients of future-oriented collaboration. Dr. Jerry Streets, who recently, during the pandemic, did a survey of over 1,000 clergy on clergy wellness and clergy well-being and how clergy were navigating the pandemic time especially. And so Dr. Streets came and talked to us about the information that he received and what he understands would be valuable to local churches to know about that. And then coming up on May 18th, you can still register. Reverend Dan Smith from First Church Cambridge will lead us in a conversation about local church ministry and public leadership. So what does that look like? What are some essential elements of that and some good strategies for that? And so he'll be talking to us about that in May. So feel free, please, to register. That's that. And then I wanted to introduce you to the Resiliency Time Capsule. Does anybody know about it? So we got a Louisville grant during the pandemic to document stories and document inspirational stories about how congregations demonstrated resilience and flexibility and response to the pandemic and how they kept their mission and ministry going. And so the whole video is an hour long, but you can watch it in 13 to 18-minute segments. And they're in 4 different categories. They're really powerful because they're coming from people like you who are sitting in the pews and folks like your Pastor Tom who got together during this time that was so unusual to us and thought about how are we going to make this work, right? And what are we going to do to continue to meet people's needs and how are we going to continue to serve our community? And so there's some very inspirational stories of transformation and hope. And we do have a set of resources online that accompany the videos. You can watch the videos and there are discussion guides and World Cafe style discussion guides for these videos and for this work. So it'll be featured again at annual meeting. So we hope that you're coming to the annual meeting. Please join us on June 17th. We will all be in Worcester, I believe, and it would be nice to have you there. But that's just one of the many things that will be happening at annual meeting is we'll be talking about the gifts of inspiration in the Resiliency Time Capsule. So you probably have a few questions, and I actually haven't told you all about the center, but I've introduced you to some portions and pieces of it just so that you have a context for me being here tonight. And I think the next thing we're going to do, in the interest of time, is to just sort of look at the overview, the lay of the land, the kinds of things that we need to consider and talk about when we talk about discerning our church's future. And because we are people of faith with sacred scriptures and stories, starting tonight with a verse from Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace, not disaster, to give you a future filled with hope. So I want to invite you into a moment of prayer with me, if we would. This is a prayer from Beth Richardson, writes for Upper Room. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Upper Room publications, but this came from one of their publications. Many times they're thematic, and so all of the writings, reflections, poetry, prayers within the different various issues are thematic. And this one, basically the title of the theme of that particular edition was Threshold. And so will you join me in Beth's prayer? We stand at the threshold and look behind us at all that we have done, at all that we have loved, at all that is familiar, and our hearts fill with grief, with sadness, and with gratitude. We stand at the threshold and look before us at the future we can and cannot see, at the beginnings we can and cannot imagine, at the possibilities we can and cannot know. And our hearts fill with fear, with trust, with hope. Bless, O God, our grief and our gratitude, our sadness and our trust, our fear and our hope. Bless this journey, God of past and future. Guide our steps, walking beside us, before us, and within us as we step across this threshold. And the people said, Amen. Thank you. So anytime I start a conversation, I like to start with some guidelines for healthy conversation. And so if you will bear with me for a moment as I walk you through this. My goal tonight, and hopefully our goal, is to promote learning and understanding this evening. And so I want to invite you to consider that we might do it this way. That when we talk to one another and talk among ourselves, we will speak in the first person using I statements when possible. We will listen for understanding, especially if we're confused or we disagree. We will seek the truth in love. We will practice mutual respect. And we will treat our time as an opportunity to make a gift to our church. Well, if you can agree with this, just give me a thumbs up. Do you have anything you'd like to add to it? Thank you. So we're going to start out by getting sort of a little bit of what they call a lay of the land, right? Where are we now? We've been through this amazing sea change in the last 3 years, and we're trying to get a sense of our equilibrium, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit to begin about the church in changing times. Some things that we know. Opportunity is born of crisis. I think if you're lucky enough to be in relationship with someone who's been through a crisis in their life and has come through that crisis to a moment of reorientation, part of the story they tell once they've reached that point is a celebration of what they learned, right? And how they've grown or developed or changed or transformed as an individual. And I think that that's true of congregations and communities and organizations and agencies as well. That oftentimes, in our life cycle, there are moments of crisis. And how we manage those crises, how do you say that? Is it crises? Crises? How did you say that? Anyway, how we manage that, and how we reorient ourselves, what we learn as we travel and journey through that, has a lot to do with who we are as people and how we deepen perhaps our personal faith, how we deepen relationships, how we navigate new ideas for ourselves about the people we are and want to be. All those things are possible. But it's also challenging. And we'd be remiss if we didn't admit to one another that it can be difficult and it can be challenging. We also know that crisis is an accelerator, that it can make things hurry up that we might have seen coming, but we misunderstood or perhaps thought we had more time to pay attention to in the future. And I think many people would say, and many people I've talked to have said, that certainly some things and changes they saw coming in the life of their local church were certainly accelerated and changed during the pandemic. And hopefully, we are becoming the post-pandemic church. maintain some of that flexibility, that willingness to experiment, that opportunity to look ahead a little bit, but not too far, into this next time in the life of the church, because it's going to be very valuable to us. So these are sort of the big three oriented questions that people ask when they do church development work, and they think that it's time to look at the life of their church, their mission and ministry, and refresh or reimagine their vision, their mission. Where are we now? Where are we going? And where is God leading us? So these are the big overarching questions. These are the big picture questions. Where are we now? Where have we landed? This isn't Kansas, Toto. You know, we do that in our own personal lives and vocational lives too, don't we? You know, there are times and moments when we have to take the time to orient ourselves. Where are we going? Might spark our imagination, our creativity, our curiosity. This is a great time for wondering and curiosity. This is a great time for curious questions. And always we ask in discernment as a people of faith, where is God leading us? And what is God's preferred future for our church? What is our unique call in response to God? How are we to serve? A very bright gentleman who works in leadership development at Fuller Seminary in California, Todd Balsinger, wrote a book before the pandemic, interestingly enough, in 2015. He's written some since then. The title of the one he wrote during the pandemic was Leadership in the Crucible, and that's a great book. But the one I want to speak about tonight is Canoeing the Mountains, which is about Christian leadership in uncharted territory. And I'm going to turn my back. There's no judgment or critique here, but I want you to raise your hand. How many of you think the church today is in uncharted territory? How many of you think this is a different time in the life of the church? How many think this is a different time in the life of the church in relationship to culture and to community? I hope I wasn't the only one raising my hand. I took a risk, right? I was vulnerable. Those are some things we have to do in these times. We have to take a risk, and we have to be vulnerable. But Todd also goes on to say, he uses the core of discovery story of Lewis and Clark in the book to talk about the church in uncharted times and leadership in uncharted times, and it's an interesting metaphor. And it plays beautifully throughout the book. So if you feel like picking something up this summer outside of that novel about Nantucket or whatever you might be reading, it's an easy read, and it's a powerful read. But I don't want to assume that you're going to take the time to read the book, because I know how lives are, they're busy. And so I want to just give you a couple of insights that he proposes in the book. Explorers Lewis and Clark thought they had the maps, the charts, the guides, and they had to adapt. They got to a certain point in their journey, and none of the maps or charts or guides served them. The guide who served them was Sacagawea, someone from the margins. And while they had prepared to find a waterway to the Pacific Ocean, instead they found themselves in the Rocky Mountains, and it was pretty confusing because they packed all the wrong stuff. You may too feel that you're leading in a cultural context you were not expecting. You may even feel that your training holds you back more often than it carries you along. Drawing from his extensive experience, Todd writes in the book and brings decades of expertise about how churches can be guided and organized through uncharted territory. And these are some of the things he says. When we're in uncharted territory, many of the maps and guides we've relied on in the past may no longer serve us. So many of the old models may not work. And we're only going to frustrate ourselves if we try harder to make the old models work, if they aren't currently working. We have to give ourselves permission to bless some things and say, this has been great, but it no longer serves us, right? In uncharted territory, trust is essential. Relationships of trust are essential. We must learn to ask new questions, and don't forget to bring your curiosity. That win-win solutions are the goal always, right? And that in these times, it's our own ongoing transformation as people of faith and as leaders in the church that's key to the transformative work that we're called to. So if we're not being transformed, it's going to be very difficult for us to achieve transformation. And he also says that vision is seeing ourselves accurately and accurately defining the current reality in which we live and in which we have our mission and ministry. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the spiritual practice of discernment and congregations and discernment. A pretty simple definition of discernment in the context of God's people and people of faith who gather in church is a process of listening for God's call and God's guidance. So the question is, how do we do that, right? And in that process of discernment, we might want to ask ourselves, what is the best possible outcome for our church and our community from God's perspective? We proclaim in the United Church of Christ a still speaking God. And sometimes we hear God in the voice of another. We hear God in the voice of a pastoral leader. We hear God in the voice of a child. We hear God in the voice of someone we are seeking to serve. And so spending time together in discernment, taking that prayerful pause before we leap forward, is always an important activity in the context of any process for church vitalization and for creating a plan for sustainability. Always we're called by the Gospels to ask ourselves, who is my neighbor, right? And how can we join God in the neighborhood? Where do we see sparks in our community? What is God doing? What is God up to? What are we witnessing? Maybe it's a new agency that's forming to serve children. Maybe it's a new agency that's forming to serve seniors. Whatever it might be, God is active in our communities. And our call is to sort of help ourselves figure that out. And to answer the question, one of the ways to do this good discernment work is to answer the question, what leads to a more compassionate, just, and peaceful world? I think you guys have those words on your website. You do, don't you? Yeah, you do. That's awesome. Simon Sinek says, oftentimes in organizations or businesses, people are hopping ahead to the how and the what, and they forget the why, right? So he invites us to start with the why. And I think you've done a little of that work too. I think you've done a little of that work recently. What is your why? Is it in your mission statement? Is it in your open and affirming statements? Is it in your vision statement? Is it in all of those statements? Right? What is your why? So to really keep that front and center is going to help you in this work of discerning your church's future. Oftentimes when you ask people, why does their church exist? Well, because it has. Well, because it has in New England for, let's see, 100 years or more, 200 years or more, 250 years or more, 300 years or more, 350 years or more, 380 years. Does that sound familiar? So within southern New England, especially within New England and within southern New England, especially because of our congregational heritage, we don't quite get a sense of what's happening nationally with faith communities. And what I can tell you is that they're being born and they're dying and completing their ministry almost every day. There are churches that are being birthed and churches that are completing their ministry faithfully and well almost every single day. And here, because we celebrate such long heritage and history, I think we get sometimes lulled into a sense that we will go on forever. But I want you to know that longevity doesn't equal sustainability. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So naming for ourselves why our church exists and remembering our why is going to be valuable in this work. Holding our why out in front of us. And that aligns with our values, right? And so what's the importance of naming our values? I think I see 4 here that might have something to do with your mission and ministry: acceptance, connection, meaning, purpose. I think I saw them on the wall over there. You know, people come to communities of faith seeking aliveness. Brian McLaren says what we're all seeking is aliveness, right? We want to know there's a purpose for our lives. We want to have meaningful lives. We want to make connections and build relationships. We want those relationships to be trusting. So keeping our why and our values in front of us is an important way to do the kind of work that we do when we look at budgets and we look at finance and we think about how we're going to spend, the resources that we have and how we're going to allocate the resources we have. Knowing what our values are helps us to decide for or against or to let go of mission initiatives and activities. It helps us to allocate our resources, and it helps us in our ongoing discernment and decision making. Do you know your church's mission statement? You've seen it, you've read it. Yeah, you have an idea. A mission statement should be written so a runner could read it. Do you know that? Do you know that Hebrews text? Nobody wants to get in the elevator with a person and go up 2 floors and go, well, I'll tell you about my church. And then they go on for a paragraph and a half. People want to hear what brings aliveness here and what makes the people who gather here alive in the work that they do. So continually asking our questions born of our mission statement: who are we seeking to serve? Why does our congregation exist? Making sure that we focus on today and what we're doing to achieve our mission. Setting a common strategic focus across the church. In those canoes, even if they'd gotten to the water, if everybody wasn't rowing, if all the oars weren't in the water and everybody wasn't rowing in the same direction, how far would they have gotten? Right? We don't need to be in lockstep, but we need to align the work that we do together, the things that we imagine, the creative mission and ministry endeavors that we seek to engage. We have to keep them in alignment with our values, our mission statement, and our vision. So if our mission statement is the why, then our vision statement is the how and the what, right? Because that's more immediate. So if our mission statement is the why, our vision statement is the how and the what. And that helps us to know how we will get there, what we need to get there, helps us again to remain focused on tomorrow and the church that we ultimately want to be and believe that we're called to be for the next generation. It gives meaning to our actions as being future-oriented, right? We can appreciate our past, but in many ways we have to relinquish our past in order to go into the future God is calling us to. So it's a pretty simple formula when you look at how to imagine the future. It's sort of an X and Y equals Z. It's if X is our mission focus and Y is our vision and our actions in alignment with X, then Z is the achievement of our vision. And that comes from some work of Thomas Griffin in a book called Be a Better Leader and a blog called Be a Better Leader. I talked about new questions for a new day, and I want to talk about that for a minute. New questions can help reframe our thinking, they can clarify our thinking, and they can motivate us to move forward. Do you know that famous story about the poet Rilke, who was working with a young person and mentored a young person, and the young person wrote and was unsettled about all the questions they had for their life and all the questions they had for their life now and in the future. And Rilke assured the young person that they were mentoring that they should love the questions themselves. Sometimes in our sense of urgency, we want to leap forward, but it's not always in our best interest to do that. And sometimes if we live with those questions, if we live with those curiosities, it can deepen our understanding of what the potential answers might be. And so I want to invite you to think about questions that you might ask as you think about the future of your church. And suggest that we might reframe our thinking if we just shift the way we ask those questions. Good night and thank you. Yeah, I know. Safe travels. Rather than asking, how are we going to attract more families? How are we going to deal with this internal conflict? You may not have one, but many churches ask themselves that, especially coming through the pandemic, which was such a challenging time because it really caused our fear and anxiety to rise, right? How are we going to become financially sustainable? How are we going to increase our membership? Rather than asking the questions that way, what if we reframe those questions to say, what might happen if we create a new vision for our future, if we learn more about the needs of our neighbors, and we sit with our neighbors and listen, if we imagine new ways to use our buildings and the way our buildings and our properties could serve our community, what might happen if we increase our community engagement? Jeff Jones writes in New Questions for a New Day, questions are a powerful source of learning, motivation, and goodness. And that if we simply reframe our questions, we might be able to and find ourselves focused on the things that really matter. I think this slide is in the wrong order, but I want to talk about it just a little bit because it's connected to vitality. And oftentimes when churches are seeking to vitalize and create a plan for sustainability, what they do is they think about new initiatives, new ideas, new ministry engagements, and new ministry offerings that might bring new life and spark new life and meet the needs of the community. And that's really good work to do. No doubt about it, really good work to do. However, there's a way in which we need to discern how those new initiatives might, and if those new initiatives might be effective, right? Or essential to the mission and ministry of our church and help enliven that vision that we have for our church before we go sort of leaping ahead. And so in her book, Innovating for Love, and she talks about innovation for social change. Kenda Creasy-Dean, who teaches at Princeton and has done tremendous sea change work in youth ministry over the course of her career, suggests that there are 3 ways to look at initiatives that are going to be important to us. We need to consider their desirability, right? Do people really want this? Is someone's asking for this, right? Is this a desirable initiative? And then we need to look at the feasibility of it, right? Can we do it? Is it possible? Is it feasible here? If we can, how should we do it? What should that look like? So do a little bit of a feasibility study. And then finally, viability. Will it work? And will it get us, more importantly, will it get us to where we want to go? Will this help move our church forward? Oftentimes in these conversations about church vitality and sustainability, we ask ourselves, well, have we focused on vitality? And what does vitality look like? What is vitality to you? Turn to the person next to you and tell them how you understand vitality. and I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do that. Talk about vitality. How do you know it? What is it? Why is it important? And folks online, I guess you could do that too in the chat, right? That might be a way to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Even if it's putting the pajamas on, 2 o'clock or staying. Before the pandemic, there were some people I didn't have Zoom, you know? Something to look forward to. Something fun to do. I think I energy. She says, oh, she said she yes.
So what'd you come up with, folks? Energy, aliveness, excitement, fun,
New things.
new things,
Contagious.
contagious,
Communication.
communication. Anything else? How about those folks online, Tom? Still thinking of it, huh?
Somebody said hope.
I don't have a neighbor to talk to.
Somebody over here said something. I think I heard it in my right ear. You know it when you feel it? Did somebody say that? Did somebody say that? You can sense it. You know it when you experience it, right? You know it when you experience it. Where do you think seekers want to go on Sunday morning? Seekers, people who are seeking a faith community, folks who are looking for a church, hoping to deepen their faith as a part of a faith community. Where do you think they want to go on Sunday mornings?
Parking lot with the most cars. Go to the church with the parking lot with the most cars.
Church with a parking lot that's convenient, that gives them space for, no? With the most cars? Most cars. Oh, because why?
People are gathering.
Because that's where the people are. Even just that physical demonstration of seeing a full parking lot means that something vital, or makes you want to believe that something vital is happening there, right? That something purposeful is happening. Thank you for your answer. What's your name?
Daddy.
Betty? Hi, Betty. I didn't meet you earlier. It's nice to see you. Thanks for being with us. So when we think about focusing on vitality and we think about plans for vitalizing our congregations, we need to think about what steps toward renewal have we taken? If not, are there barriers? Are there something in our way? And if there are barriers, can we identify those barriers? And if there are barriers we have identified, how can we move them, remove them, work with them, change them, work through them? How can we do that? Oh, critical mass. When we talk about church vitalization and sustainability plans, we talk about critical mass or capacity. What is a capacity? Well, it has to do with everything, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. But critical mass is essential, and it really is about how many people we really have that have an energy and a willingness and a commitment to pour out their time, their talent, and treasure to help our church realize its purpose and vision, right? So the people that are making ministry and mission happen on behalf of the church. But it also has to do with our resources, financial and otherwise. This beautiful building, this setting that you were in for supper tonight, that you're in for coffee hour on a Sunday morning, that's a beautiful resource. It's a beautiful space. So we have to assess our capacity and talk about our resources and how we align those resources with our vision and what our future plans call us to do and how those things might come together and offer us some new or renewed energy for the work of creating a vital and sustainable ministry. We talked about time, talent, treasure. How many of you heard that phrase in the church before? Raise your hand. This time I'm looking. Let's talk about that a little bit. Whoops. People say people are busy, and we give them all kinds of excuses to not be with us, right? And we give them all kinds of excuses. And once in a while, somebody takes a role or responsibility on behalf of the church, and they have to relinquish that because something has happened in life that's unexpected. But a vital congregation is a congregation on the move. It's a congregation that's alive, where people want to participate. They want to make sure that the endeavors that the church is focused on are happening, and happening in an effective way. And so a lot of times we hear stories. I think I read something probably 10 years ago in my local newspaper about how our town government was having a difficult time finding people to be on the Inland Wetlands Committee and to be on the Library Committee and so we had this general notion that volunteerism was on the wane and that people didn't want to do things. But these statistics from the national government tell us a different story, including about the way people spend their time. According to national statistics, 64 million Americans volunteer every year. And according to those same statistics, they donate 50 hours of their time per year on average. Some of you might be sitting right in these pews. These statistics might sound familiar to you because they're the kind of volunteer life that you live. 64 million Americans volunteer each year, and the national average for a volunteer hour is $29. It's worth $29.95. And in Massachusetts, it's $36.38. So this does speak to a country that remains rich in volunteerism. So we ask ourselves, what choices are people making? How are they choosing to allocate their volunteer hours and commitment? How are we tending relationships within our community and with our congregants and the volunteers that we engage? How are we supporting them? How are we affirming them? How are we calling forth their gifts, right? Are people mismatched to roles or the work we ask them to do, or is that work in alignment with their gifts and their skills and their passions? Are they encountering barriers to participation? Because sometimes, I read a great volunteer book one time. It was written by a father and a son. They work in the church. In there, there was one sentence, and I'm not a sports fan. Well, I like basketball and baseball, but I really don't. Not on a regular basis. Anyway, in the introduction to their book, they said, the key element in successful volunteerism is to pass them the football. Right? Gail, I'd really love for you to do this, but I want to tell you how to do it, and I want to tell you when to do it, and I want to tell you why you should do it. Pass them the football. Sometimes the barriers to successful volunteerism in our congregations, volunteerism that could vitalize our congregations, is that we're mismanaging folks' energies. or there's a lack of clarity about what we'd like them to do. What are they called to do? What's the meaning of the word talent? I think there are a few parables that focus on talents. As I understand it, in the essence of the gospel, our talents are the gifts we each possess, the gifts of many used for the common good. In the church, we experience gifts of people who are alive and want to make a difference, and they have new ideas and they bring new things to leadership. And oftentimes, those talents deepen the gifts of new or emerging partnerships or deepen partnerships. So when we think about talent, we think about it not to simply maintain the faithful remnant, but for future impact. Our gifts are multiplied when we use them for the member and the stranger alike, and when they are in keeping with God's unique call or plan for your church. That requires a new or renewed vision, as we've said earlier this evening. It requires new ideas and new leadership, and those are often the result of an inspiring vision and the good work of vision keeping in alignment with a reality-based plan for sustainability. New and deepening partnerships come when folks are inspired, when they see the sign out front that says there's something I want to be a part of, right? So when they're inspired and perceive your vitality, your energy, your plan for sustainability, that contagious energy one recognizes when there's momentum growth in an organization or agency or congregation. In addition, this work, when thought through intentionally and thoughtfully and well, often leads to sharing our gifts in a way that multiplies our gifts in ways that we could never imagine. In ways that we could never imagine. We see it in children when they step out for the first time, right? Remember, I turned around, I raised my hand, and and then I turned around and I raised my hand, and I was being vulnerable, and I was taking a risk. Children will do that in our midst. They will lead us. They will help us to know when something has value, when something's important, when something's meaningful in the life of our church. They'll often step out in joy and wonder, with curiosity, playfully. They don't know what they're doing, but they want to do it. They want to be a part of it because they have a sense that there's something good and meaningful inherent in it, right? And they want to participate. They want to join in and join along. The church has the gift of 5 generations. Oftentimes, a couple of those generations are most prominent, and especially today. But the church has the gift of 5 generations, and it's one of the few places in our culture where those 5 generations can gather. So the question really is, how do we do that successfully and well? How do we reach multiple generations who are formed in different times, who have different worldviews, who have different expectations, and bring them together in one place to find that sense of aliveness that we're all seeking, right? So that's talent. And the last word is treasure. So the bullets on this slide say healthy and transparent management of financial resources. Do we have a scarcity or abundance mentality? Are we practicing our discipleship as faithful stewards? And what is the time of diminished or diminishing returns in terms of allocation of our resources? These are all things we need to think about when we think about our treasure. What are those places of diminished or diminishing returns in terms of the resources and the financial resources we expend? Reminding ourselves that transparency is essential and an essential management tool in alignment with our values when it comes to our financial resources, and indeed all of our resources, right? This beautiful sanctuary is a resource. Decision-making process should be clear and consistent, and we need to ask ourselves, are we holding tight to that which might serve us if it was deployed or distributed in a new way? And is the distribution and deployment of those resources in keeping with our values? Do people give in accordance with a vitality mindset? Faithful stewardship includes aligning our resources with the abundance God has given us to steward, and that may mean looking at new ways to gift or grant funds or partnerships to agencies and organizations in our community that make a difference, that are important to us as we make plans for the future. We must discern how to best use our resources and recognize that they're not infinite, but they're abundant. There's a difference. They're not infinite, but they're abundant. And ask ourselves, could they continue to be available to us? Let's see, how did I want to say this too? Could they continue to be available to us from former or currently predictable revenue streams? So looking at various aspects and various revenue streams and various ways of funding the important mission and ministry that we believe that we're called to. I'm going to move on now, but I'm just going to stop for a second because I think we have about 15 or 20 minutes left. And I want to ask, does anyone have any questions about the time, talent, treasure? Or want to make a comment? Anything? Still with me? Okay. There was some good punch and some good seltzer on that table, but I didn't see any high-test coffee. No. Thank you, Karen. No, I was just thinking, a little caffeine at 8 o'clock at night goes a long way. Maybe it's too far sometimes. Have you seen a model of a life cycle of a church? No. You have. Betsy has. You got the slides. Oh, these are a little different. I tweaked them a little, but you got the slides. So you've seen one model, right? You've seen this model. And this is the model that's most related to the model that George Bullard created when he began talking about, all organizations, we all have a life cycle. Our pets have a life cycle. We have a life cycle. Most things have a life cycle. Organizations, businesses, agencies have a life cycle. The church has a life cycle too. And I want to talk about that for a few minutes because I just want to give you a hint of some of the work that you might do as you continue this conversation. So it's hard to read the words, I'm sure, on that slide, but let me just walk you through this very basic plan of a life cycle of a church. And I think you'll all be able to hear me without, right? Yeah? Cool, thank you. Does that do anything to the people on Zoom? I'm sorry. Testing. Oh, wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, folks, for your patience. So the life cycle of a church, from the left side of the bell curve to the right side of the bell curve, I'm just going to walk you through the life phases or life stages of a church. And so this is a launch moment. And this is a moment where a new idea is formed, a new community comes together, and folks who are early adopters are really eager to make something happen. And vision is very strong in a launch. Vision is essential and very strong in a launch. What may be missing in a launch is some resources. But a church launch or an organizational launch begins with a strong vision and good ideas and a few people who are really passionate. And their passion sparks others. And so people get excited and they experience some momentum growth. And it happens organically. It happens quite naturally. And people really get excited about the new thing that's happening. And pretty soon, they've got to put some organization to that growth. So there's a time of strategic growth where the new church start, the new congregation, has to come together and talk about how they'll organize themselves and answer some of those questions we talked about tonight. How will they get resources? How will they deploy their resources? How will they utilize their resources? What activities will enliven their mission and their vision? And then there's that time where all of that is happening, and it's happening with a real sense of all the wheels in the machine turning the way that they're supposed to. And so churches experience a period of sustained health, If in that moment of sustained health, we're not asking ourselves about the new vision, about the future, about what tomorrow's ministry calls for, it's really easy to lose our way. And when we lose a vision, it's very easy to slide into maintenance. So we're maintaining an organization that we created, but nothing new is coming from it. Nothing new is being added to it. Thank you. My local weather station, I'm sorry. Unbelievable. Probably more rain. And maybe sun on Saturday, maybe 70-degree weather. That would be nice. Maintenance is a time of just things are moving along, but we're sort of not feeling it, and we've lost our way a little, and we may see a little bit of a decline in participation. We may see a decline in resources. We may see a decline in enthusiasm and energy and passion. And if we're not careful to think about what's happening to us and naming where we are and thinking about where's that vision that we held for so long that was so important to us and what might a new vision look like, then it's really easy to slip into preservation. And after preservation comes completion of ministry. Sometimes that happens beyond the wherewithal of people within the system to create effective change and to create transformation. And churches who complete their ministry well and create a legacy as they complete their ministry, there's no shame in that, in recognizing they've come to the end of their life cycle. The thing is doing the work with intention and care and the same thoughtfulness and compassion that we use for our mission and ministries when we're alive, right? When we have that aliveness. Because no one wants to be the last person to walk out the door and turn the key, face the unpaid bills and think, do we have enough people? You need at least 8 to 12 in the Commonwealth to sign paperwork, hire a lawyer, close your nonprofit, right? But when you don't do that work with intention, just like you would do any of the good work of the church, you're left with a more complicated grief. And there's going to be grief, it's going to be inevitable if a church completes its ministry. But a complicated grief is because a church didn't engage that work faithfully and well the way they engaged their mission and ministry. And so they're going to be left with a lot of feelings that are unsettled and unresolvable. Another model tells us where in the life cycle vision, relationships, ministries, and structure are important. So the vision is where are we going, the relationships are who is going with us, the ministry is how do we get there, and the structure is how do we manage all of it, right? And so on this particular model, the curve is a little less, the bell curve is a little less prominent, but it's a birth to death kind of curve that explores all of the various stages and ages, incomparable stages and ages to our life cycle. Birth, childhood, adolescence, maturity, empty nest, old age, and death. And it helps us to understand where vision is valuable and important. And all of these four things, vision, relationships, ministry, and structure, are essential to the health and life and well-being of a church, to the vitality and sustainability of a church. So in maturity, we have all those things happening. Vision, relationships, ministries, and structure are all present. But as you can see on the left-hand side of the bell curve, that, in childhood, in sort of that launch phase that we talked about on the earlier model, vision and relationships are key, and those take prominence. In adolescence, we add ministries to that vision and relationship. And then, of course, over in empty nest, the vision is missing. Just another model. And then there's a redevelopment life cycle model. And all of these have value because all of these have something to lend. I wonder if you'd spend a little time thinking about where your church is on the life cycle bell curve. Where is your church on the life cycle bell curve? Just think about it for a moment. This is going to be an important question and an important activity for all congregations in this time, because the cultural landscape has shifted so that it's going to be really important for churches to identify where they are in the life cycle and what comes next. So we ask ourselves, what does vitality look like? I asked you, you had some great answers. Let me tell you a little bit about the characteristics or nature of vital churches. They are comfortable and confident with their unique call and their identity. They can effectively use and sustain resources for their mission and ministry activities to enliven their vision, right? They are sustainable in size and realistic about their capacity. They have a present and future orientation, and they've been able to successfully relinquish nostalgia. Our history is important, but nostalgia doesn't serve us. And they have a multi-generational capacity. Remember, I talked about the gift of 5 generations. They have a multi-generational capacity. I'm going to hop ahead a little bit. Because as someone said, you have the slides. So we ask what resurrection looks like. It looks like adaptive transformation, not a series of incremental changes or technical fixes, right? And it has the power to utilize resources to do God's work in new ways. We ask ourselves, what are the vitality warning signs? And Rick Morris, in his book From Our Doorsteps, and Rick Morris is something of a church redevelopment guru who is an ordained Disciples of Christ minister, asks us about these 4 markers. Are we spending 50% or more on staff? And the unstuck group, those good church development folks, would suggest that 45 to 55% is about the right range for today. Are we spending 25% or more, 30% or more on buildings and grounds? Are we spending 15% or less on programs and 10% or less on mission and outreach? Just some things to think about when we think about our financial well-being and what we need to do to resource our mission and our ministry. And a lot of that has to do with staffing alignments and all kinds of things. And the center can provide you with some really good materials and articles if that's work that you need to do in the future. Oops. Just a couple reminders. This is really not a time to press pause. This is a time to press reset. Not a time to press pause, but a time to press reset. And again, I said this earlier, longevity and sustainability are not the same. So what does the future look like? Well, the prophet Isaiah helps remind us that God is at work in all things, Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? That's from Isaiah 43, verse 19. So this is us. You can find help with us. We are the Center for Transformational Leadership of the Southern New England Conference, and you can reach us. Our naming conventions for our emails are our last name, first initial. So it would be Ramsey Mabruk, h@sneucc.org, or Ziel, Z-I-E-L. By the way, this name tag's wrong. Even my own peeps don't know how to spell my last name, but I wear it anyway because I'm waiting on a new one. But it's Z-I-E-L letter K at SNEUCC.org is how you can reach me, or you can reach us at transform@SNEUCC.org. And that's what I have for you for the most part this evening. What are your questions? What are your comments? What are your wonderings? Yeah, Patty.
A church that you've worked with that's gone through some of these processes, like what challenges were they facing and how did they, I'm going to say, reinvent themselves?
So we have a couple of communications that come out of the Southern New England Conference. One of them comes out on Wednesdays, and it's called 5 Things to Share, and there's some really good stories there. And one story we've told in the last year is about 2 congregations who came together and merged. So they were similar in size, they served the same community, they had similar resources to bring to bear in terms of volunteer energies and the people, and in terms of their financial. And they looked around and said, it doesn't make sense for the 2 of us to be here, right, struggling to be relevant and create a plan for sustainability when we're about 2.5 miles apart from each other, maybe 3. And, maybe it takes 6 minutes instead of 5 if you get caught at the light in the center of town, right? So they spent 3 years. First, they started experimenting. They had dinner together. They played together. One had a community garden, and volunteers from the other church came and worked in the community garden. They started sharing activities, especially those that made a difference and an impact in their community. And they started to have conversations about what it would look like if they began to think about aligning themselves in these activities and in their mission and ministry endeavors. And so over the course of 3 years, they had teams that were formed to look ahead. They named a new vision. They came through that time, and both churches had a successful vote to come together. And so where they were once called First Church in Granby, Connecticut, and South Church in Granby, Connecticut, they're now called the Granby Congregational Church. So far, they've kept both campuses. I think that they needed additional time as they came together to think about which would be the right property, if either property was the right property, and what they would do, with the property that they chose not to sort of use as their church home. So they're still looking at that, and there's more to come. We have stories of churches that are very small, nesting or being adopted by bigger churches. We have a church that's one of 5 in a small city in central Connecticut who looked ahead and realized when all was said and done that based on many of these criteria and many of the things that we talked about tonight, that they would no longer be viable as a church. They couldn't sustain themselves, and they couldn't create a path forward for sustainability. Pretty much they'd waited in maintenance too long and slipped into preservation. And so what they did was they have an interim minister, and they got really creative, and they decided they were going church shopping one summer. And basically, both within the community they were part of and outside the community in neighboring towns, they went and visited. And they found a church they want to be a part of. And so they're experimenting, they're having conversations, their actual interim minister is now going to cover the sabbatical of the minister in the larger church that will probably adopt them. They'll be able to, sell their property and realize some kind of financial gain. Basically, they're going to, have dinner themselves, a few times a year and do some small group Bible study themselves. But they're also going to look at being assimilated into the larger congregation. So they're going to both hold their small church identity, because they're a very small community. They're like 8 to 10 people. So they're going to, yeah, no, they're very small. Now, I'm not telling you guys, I'm just saying, somebody asked about stories. I'm just telling you a few creative things that are happening. But those things are happening is because people took a risk and they looked realistically. Remember I said, knowing what your current reality is? They looked at their current reality and said, we can't any longer sustain ourselves the way we are. And there are going to be some financial implications. The building needed capital improvements they couldn't afford, all of those things. So it's really important, Gail, to do this development work because, and Patty, this is what helps us understand where we are and what we need to do. Other questions, comments, curiosities? Take them into your week. Take them into your month. I'm sure your church will continue to have conversation. If you're looking for resources or tools, please let us know. I think, am I at liberty to say that there's been an application to our ADAPT program? So I didn't even get a chance to tell you about ADAPT tonight, but I have a sneaky suspicion you know something about it. We're in a pilot phase with ADAPT, which means assess, discern, align, plan, and transform. It's an acronym because in the United Church of Christ, we like acronyms. We are. We are an acronym people. So ADAPT is a program which is helping congregations at every stage of the life cycle reimagine their mission and ministry, having come through a pandemic time, take a real good look at their current reality, and decide for themselves what the best way forward. And one of the benefits of that is that they'll have a shepherd who's a church development expert, someone who has expertise. They won't work as a consultant, they'll work as a shepherd. So they'll be in the congregation, meeting with people, having conversations, and you've applied, and I'm grateful for your application. I'm hopeful for your application, and we have 4 slots, and we have, I think, 4 congregations in Massachusetts who are going to be looking for 2 of those slots. And so there will be some churches who will have to say, you may have to wait a few months until we sort of get our legs under this and see what, how this process really works. But we're really hopeful for it. We just, in the interest of the people we serve, wanted to pilot it with 4 congregations so that we'd have a better idea if it works as well as we think it might. So that's what we're doing. Thank you, Memorial UCC Sudbury. This was a beautiful place to come to. I've never been to this neck of the woods, and it's really beautiful. Thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for your generous listening.